I'm really excited about this conversation today with Bill. He's been a good friend for a long time, and the guy is just an expert on all things e-commerce, marketing. The guy knows it inside and out. He built a Holdco, fairly large Holdco at that, and then chose to deconstruct it all and go all in on one of his portfolio companies. And so today we're going to talk to him about going the reverse direction from what most people do, which is they all want to build a Holdco. He's taken a Holdco and then broken it down. He's now becoming an operator, and I just can't wait to hear the insights he has today for us. We're here with Bill, who, well, let's just talk about it, is a great dude. Happens to be in business, happens to have had a Holdco, focusing now on one business. We'll get into all that, but just is a dear friend of the firm and somebody we've been tracking with for a long time.
I'm excited to talk with Bill. I'm excited to get to know you a little bit more. I've been following you from afar on the internets, your podcast, Acquisitions Anonymous, and I feel like you're in a little bit of a podcast tour though, because a little bit ago you were on Chris Powers and you've been on a couple others. So I'm excited to extend that tour you're on right now on the Permanent Podcast. Welcome, Bill.
The best stop of the tour.
Of course, the finale of the tour.
There we go.
Dude, it's not a tour though. Honestly, my friends just say, "Hey, I really got some dead air on the podcast. Will you fill in?"
I know, Bill. Let's get Bill.
Thank God. Yeah, we can get Bill to come on.
He'll do anything.
He likes to talk. No, no, man. We're so excited to have you on, and it's interesting because as I was thinking about kind of the flow of today's podcast, what we want to talk about, you and I have been on a very similar journey, very different in many ways, but very similar in others. And I was trying to think back to the first time we met. It was in Charlotte. And how long ago was that? It was a long time ago.
That was easily 5 years ago, I think. Pre-pandemic, definitely.
I think I was thinking it was more like 8, maybe 7.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a long time ago. And I remember I happened to be in Charlotte doing some other stuff. And I reached out to a few people and I was like, hey, anybody want to grab drinks, dinner? And man, not only did you show up, you brought some friends. It was just a great time. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is really cool. Like to be able to go on a journey with somebody and not feel like you're alone. I mean, at that time, you know, I had insecurities about what we were doing, about our model. I remember we talked a lot about like, what are we trying to build towards? And since then, it's been interesting because we really have been on parallel paths that then until recently, I think fairly significantly diverged. So I'm just excited today to talk about, you know, that journey and how you've chosen a different direction and how excited I am for you in that direction and see what we can get out of it.
You know, Brent, I'd love to just mention that dinner, hearing you talk about it is so interesting to me because when you reached out, you had sent kind of like a big email like, hey, I'm coming to Charlotte. And I had listened to you on a couple podcasts before that. And I was on a plane. I vividly remember I made my wife, Natalie, listen to an early podcast you did.
My condolences.
And I really enjoyed it. And I made her listen to it. She hangs it up and she goes, that guy sounds exactly like you. You guys should be friends. And at the time I was like, geez, really? Because I, have my own insecurities. And you sent that, it was a tweet or something. And I was like, oh my God, like I get to have dinner with Brent Beshore. And I was like so pumped, right? But it's funny because I think everybody kind of, you know people on the internet and you think, oh, they must have it all together. That, the guy's such a big deal or whatever. And you were insecure about coming to dinner with me. And I was insecure about going to dinner with you. And I just think it's such a cool illustration of how people are just people.
That's right.
People on the internet, people who have had some success or small amount of success or no success, as I guess we both had at the time. It's just, you shouldn't be afraid to reach out to people. They're much more accessible than you think. It's cool to hear that.
And I think the real value, friendships are built on vulnerability and on truth. And I think it's super easy in this world, especially I think even since then, to project this image of who we are. And it's really a performative act. And what ends up happening is you don't actually get to know anybody because if they relate to you, if you get them to like you, they don't really like you. They like the mask that you're wearing. And so what I loved about you, Bill, and during that conversation, and I think people get a window into this today, is like, you're just you. And you're sometimes confident in things that don't work out. And sometimes you're insecure about things that do. And that's what makes it possible to actually have a genuine, meaningful friendship with you, which, now has endured for quite a while. And so excited to dive in. David, where do you want to start, man?
I spend anything I know, I learn from Twitter. And
that's a scary thing.
Yeah.
David, we may need to have a life talk. Maybe actually, Bill, I'm glad you're here for the intervention. Can we?
Well, I actually want to ask you guys both a question because you spend 10 minutes on, investment twit. FinTwit, whatever word you want to use. And holdcos are hot right now. And what I'm learning is you just buy a company, hire an operator, and start raking in some cash. Is that true?
Totally. It's 100% true. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Bill and I are both like, our eyes are watering right now.
I feel like I'm losing money not just starting my own holdco.
Yeah.
And after this, I'm going to go start.
Well, I mean, maybe that's the conclusion you come to at the end of this. Yeah. Bill, what do you think about this internet party that seems to have erupted on Twitter over the last 18 months to 2 years about, I mean, honestly, what David just said is like, buy a business, hire an operator, and
sit back, enjoy,
go to Tahiti and let the mailbox money come rolling in.
So the funny thing for me is I've seen this movie before. This was the e-commerce movie that happened in the early 2010s, right? So I got into e-commerce in 2010 and it was kind of budding and not a lot of people knew what it was. Amazon was still very small and, started selling stuff on the internet. But then around kind of 2015, there was this explosion of, sell stuff online from the beach in Tahiti, outsource everything to virtual assistants, 4-hour work week. I guess 4-hour work week was written a few more years before that, but really kind of in the mid 2010s, there was this huge explosion of kind of get rich quick e-com, right? And it's so easy and you just do it like this. And there were gurus popping up left, right, and center. And, and then it kind of culminated in the Amazon aggregators raised, tens of billions of dollars literally to roll up Amazon brands. And then it kind of all popped and deflated, recently when everybody figured out that you can't get rich quick and, e-commerce is a knife fight and it's actually quite hard. And I feel like the same thing is happening in in holdcos rather, like Brent, we've been doing holdcos for a while and it's in the 2015 bubble stage, I think now on Twitter. And in another couple of years, it's going to be in the bust stage. I think people are going to realize it's much harder in real life than it is on Twitter.
Well, let me ask a question. So do you know many people who are actually following through on starting holdcos, or the people who I see talking most confidently on Twitter in particular about holdcos are people who either have never done it and are a service provider, so they have an interest in trying to gin up as much fees for their business as they can, or are selling a course, which again is self-interested in, hey, I've got this secret. And it reminds me a little bit, I was out in San Diego in the early 2010s and met this guy, super successful, internet marketing guy, drove a Lamborghini or Ferrari, had this like beautiful lifestyle. And look, he got like, I don't know, 6-7 drinks in. And I was kind of like, I cornered him and I was like, hey man, like really admire what you're doing. Like, can you tell me like, what are the stats, like the inside stats? Like, so how, this app that you created or, this website, like what did you, and I mean, he just kind of was like, haha, yeah, man, that's what everyone thinks. He's like, man, I make a ton of money, but I've never made money actually building anything other than courses.
Woof.
And it was a watershed moment for me where I was like, the image that was public, and he would just flat out lie. And he would say, take my course because I'll teach you how to build an app and with, minimal money. And then, again, live in Tahiti and do all these things. And he literally was selling like $5 or $7 million a year of these courses to people who were desperate to make more money, have a better lifestyle. And I mean, look, we all have those drives, those urges, right? I think this is, again, where I'm seeing a lot of this on Twitter, and it feels the same shisty, shilly sort of way where the people who are advocating for it most are selling courses. And I get a lot of people come in and I'm sure Bill, you do the same, like ask about like, okay, hey, I want to do what you do. Like, how do you do it? And like out of maybe 300 or 400 people that have contacted me over the last, 3 or 4 years, like maybe 2 of them are actually doing it.
Yes.
And it's hard. And the people who are actually doing it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is brutal.
Yeah, well, the thing is about making courses and about running holdcos, they're both extremely time intensive, right? I mean, making a course and self-promoting it all over Twitter constantly and creating all of that content is very time intensive. I don't know anyone actually running a holdco that is able to produce the deluge of content that it would take to be a guru on the topic. So I think they're almost mutually exclusive by definition.
Yeah, it's like, I want to tell people, and I've said this in the past, it's like, there is gold in the hills. Like, it's not to say that you cannot start a holdco and do well. I mean, you can. And I mean, obviously we have 2 very different pathways to doing so, but I just feel like that people need to have their expectations tempered, that this is a long, slow march of obedience in the same direction over a very long period of time to potentially have the opportunity to do well in this. This is not whatever the get rich scheme thing is. It's not that. Like if you want to get rich fast, like starting a Holdco is about the worst idea in the history of the world.
Selling courses though ain't bad. Forget get rich quick. Selling courses about Holdco.
Yeah, I was gonna say selling courses is easier.
So I know of a couple. I think your friend's also Brent with Kelsey Larrick at 365 Holdings.
Absolutely.
And Kelsey is a guy that's actually doing it, who impresses me a lot.
I agree.
Justin Turner at Traction Capital. I don't know if you know him.
Yep.
And then, of course, my close friend Michael Girdley as well has a legitimate Holdco. And actually, he may buck the trend because he has a course on how to do a Holdco. He's capitalizing on the demand.
He's just bored. He's just been so successful, he's bored.
Yes, pretty much. Well, he is such a master delegator that he has the time. And I would say that he is, in a lot of ways, kind of the prototypical example of how it should be done. He refuses to be CEO of any of the companies. And he always brings on a CEO, which is, I think, the only way to do it. And we can talk about some of my own failings in that exact area, in fact.
Well, so let's dive in. Let's talk about what your arc has been. When we first met, you were building a Holdco of, I would say that like internet e-commerce type companies. You were acquiring 1, 2, maybe even 3 a year. You were building a shared services model. I mean, I think seems like the holy grail of what, again, people talk about as something they want to pursue. So walk us through what worked, what didn't, what happened?
Yeah. So when we met, Brent, I had just raised $3 million at outside capital, the first and only capital that I raised to accelerate the pace. I had 2 or 3 brands in the portfolio, and we were going to buy, 2 or 3 per year for several years and fund it mostly from cash flow. If you follow kind of the Holdco storyline, that's what we were going to do. So we had 3. We got to the portfolio as big as 8 by 2018. And then operated at 8 from 2019 in 2020 through the pandemic. And then in 2021, we kind of ended up in a unique situation. One of our companies, Natural Dog Company, which we'll talk about more later in the podcast, was doing really, really well. I was seeing this power law outcome where one of the brands was crushing it. All the others were doing well, but this one was growing so fast, it was starting to gobble the whole portfolio. So we had one brand that was 70% of sales and 7 brands that were 30% of sales. It was almost exactly Pareto in real life. And my board kind of came to me and they said, I have a number of really smart folks, including Scott Perper from Pamlico Capital, who you met at dinner, Brent. And my board came to me and they said, Bill, you have a tiger by the tail. You need to focus on it. You need to stop this Holdco thing. You need to sell everything else and go all in on Natural Dog Company. And what did I say, of course? I said, absolutely not. I'm the entrepreneur. I'm very attached to this Holdco concept. It sounds very sexy. Like, let's keep doing that. And that led to
it was an identity issue. I mean, that's what it's really good to pause on this minute for a second, because I think that it's really helpful for me to even hear that, is like how much of my identity is intertwined in how I present myself to the world. And I think that that's what you just said, is like your investors come to you and say, hey, we think this would actually be economically a much better pathway to take, would lead to more flourishing, more success, and your pride flares up, right?
Yeah. Yes,
so
totally.
Talk about that process. Like what frame of mind, what odds would you have put when they first came to you on doing this, and what ended up kind of changing your heart in that direction?
It was very much a 2-phase process. I'll get to why I finally caved. But yeah, I was so attached to myself as the e-commerce roll-up guy. I mean, it was in my Twitter bio, it was my whole content brand. It was how people knew me at, industry conferences. It was how I introduced myself to people. And I was like, I'm going to give that all up. Everyone's going to think I've failed. The logical part of my brain agreed with my board that this was the right move. If you were just dispassionately zoom out, and treat it like a case study, I could see it. But emotionally, I was having a really hard time letting go of that identity.
Yeah. Well, isn't this the question, right? I think Buffett makes a comment about this and says, would you rather be the world's best lover or known as the world's best lover? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same problem.
It's the exact same problem. How do people see you? And it reminded me also, I was at a conference once of entrepreneurs and they brought in a psychologist who worked with entrepreneurs, and she had done a study where she did flashcards, and she showed a bunch of entrepreneurs, she hooked electrodes up to their brains and showed them a bunch of pictures of various things. And she showed them pictures of their family, their children, and pictures of the logo of their company. And it was the exact same brain regions that lit up when the entrepreneur viewed the logo of the company as when they viewed their children. They were that attached. But I empathize with that. I mean, entrepreneurs birth companies out of nowhere, right? And grow them and nurture them and all that stuff. So we're very, very attached.
So you get attached, you are attached, that gets shaken. You probably have a fairly violent internal emotional reaction to that. And then you start thinking about it, I assume. And obviously over time you thought more and more, and ultimately that won out. Like, what actually was that process?
Yeah. So I resisted for nearly a year. I kind of retreated in baby steps. I agreed to sell some of kind of the non-core brands. And I said, okay, let's just skinny down to pet and skincare, which would have led to kind of divesting about half the portfolio. We would have gotten down.
And those are two separate things. It's not pet skincare. It's
pet
and skincare.
And skincare as
gotcha.
Two different buckets. So that would have led us to go from about 8 brands to 4 brands. So I agreed to do that, and we started that process. And when we were nearing the end of that process, what I kind of received was a kick in the nuts, but in hindsight, it turned into a real gift, which was that I basically fell apart. I couldn't handle it anymore. As far as kind of running all of the brands, we had a couple key people leave. I had been kind of holding on really tight, driving the team really hard. And a couple people just said, hey, we're out. Don't want to do it anymore. And I was like, just knocked for a loop, right? Because how am I going to do it without these key team members? Like, we're driving so hard. And as a result, I kind of hit this rock bottom, and I said, oh my God, like I have been doing this, to myself. And I work with a bunch of people, I don't really like, on some brands I don't really like. And I started this off so I could hang out more with my kids and my wife, and I'm working 60 or 70 hours a week. Like, I've lost the plot. And that was what finally made me give in and say, I think I can acquiesce to my investors, and also it's really is a good thing for me, and I don't know why I've been fighting it.
Talk about when you say you lost the plot, like what is the plot and how did you lose it?
Well, the plot for me was, so I grew up in a family, an intact family. I have great relationships with both my parents. My dad was a surgeon. My dad worked his butt off. Now, he was always there for everything that was important. He was always there for all my games, plays, like everything. He was always there and it mattered. But I could tell he worked his butt off, and I knew he did it for our family. And so kind of one thing that was in my head is I want to be really successful, like my dad was, and to provide for my family. But I want to try to do it in a way that allows me to be more present, because I saw the amount of stress it put on him trying to provide and work that hard and also be there for us. So not a slight on my dad, just I saw it was hard for him. So when I started the company, I said, I'm going to build this. I started the company in my 20s, mid-20s. I had no wife, no kids, anything. And I said, I'm going to take a long road here and build this thing so I can be at my kids' soccer games, and I cannot be like my former bosses in investment banking who are taking calls on the sideline of a soccer game on Saturday. I don't want that to be me. Then fast forward, you just want more and more and more, and you push. And all of a sudden, the thing that you created as this lifestyle design vehicle, to borrow a term from Tim Ferriss, had turned into, I was working on weekends, and there was stuff that couldn't wait, and I was the bottleneck for stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not the thing I signed up for. This is in fact explicitly the thing I didn't want. And yet here I am.
Yeah, man, I can relate to that. I've gone through periods of my life where the amount of stress and strain and pressure, it just felt overwhelming. It was inescapable. I would wake up in the morning with sweaty palms. I felt like I was under attack. And then you just try to get through the day and get into bed and maybe get 4 or 5 hours. You'll lay there for 8 hours or maybe even 8.5 hours, but you'll get like 4 or 5 hours of actual sleep, just enough to get through the next day. And man, it is both brutally difficult and intoxicating. I think this is the tough part in some ways. And I think the intoxication, at least for me, and I'm curious what you would say, Bill, is around the desire to be needed and to feel impactful, to feel like you matter. And I think there's something deep in my soul that's been broken and I think is being healed, but not completely healed, where I feel like I need to I need to matter. And the way to matter is not to be with my family, which is how I actually matter and how I show up with friends, how I show up with family, how I show up, to honor people around me. But I need to matter because people can say, oh, look at Brent, he can do something spectacular. Did you feel that desire to be spectacular? Is that what drove you, or was it something else?
Yeah. I mean, my desire is to win, right? To never let it be said about me that I didn't work hard enough, or that, I could have had it. And just because he was lazy, he didn't have it. I feel like God has given me a lot of talents, and I just have this drive to not waste them. I think it would be a crime, right? And that's what drove me. If something comes across your desk and you go, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity, or like, we could take that on, or all I got to do is work, 3% harder. Like I could work 1 more hour a week, like to pursue this awesome opportunity. And no single one of them is the thing that buries you, right?
Yep.
But they add up, and before you know it, you are underwater.
There's like a dilution of emotional energy. I mean, yeah, you can do it for time-wise, but like you can only really care about 1, maybe 2 things at a time. And I think that's one thing I've realized too. And it's like, what are the 1 or 2 things that I really deeply care about? And I've got to focus on those. And that's about it for me. I get burned out otherwise.
I could not agree more. Brent, I know you know who Paul Graham is from Y Combinator.
Yep.
And I'm sure you probably read some of his essays on his website, maybe
almost all of them.
Have you read the one, The Top Idea in Your Mind?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So I just think this is like a 1-page essay. If you're listening, you can just Google it, The Top Idea in Your Mind. And Paul just encapsulates this concept of there can really only be 1 to 2 things that are the top idea in your mind. The thing that you are thinking about when you are not thinking. It is the thing that you have epiphanies about in the shower, or on your drive to work, or when you're on a hike. The things that just, it hits you like a lightning bolt. And when you try to have 8 top ideas in your mind, you can't. Kind of nothing sits in that spot, and you get no epiphanies. And Paul's kind of thesis is that the epiphanies are where all the big leaps come from. The ability to integrate, across competencies and industries and domains. And that really only happens, when you're sleeping, when you're spaced out, when you're showering and driving, et cetera. And so I really found that. I was a mile wide and an inch deep. I did not have a top idea in my mind, and all of our brands were suffering for it.
Yeah. Have you read the book Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer?
I've heard of it, but not read it.
Well, one, I'll send you a copy. It is a fantastic wake-up call read for what I would call pioneering entrepreneurship types, which both you and I fall into that group. I mean, it's a great read for everyone else. I can only speak from experience. For our type that is always has this high drive to succeed, to do more, to push the boundaries, to look around the corner, to build a better future. The book, you'd expect it to say you need to slow down. And yes, that obviously is a big part of it, but it's actually slow down to get to the meaning underneath things. And I find like when I am a little bit bored, I make the greatest leaps forward. For me, for my family, for the organization, I can't work on me, and I really can't meaningfully work on anything unless I'm a little bit bored. Now, that doesn't mean lazy. I have such a high laziness detector. Like I get worried if I go on like a long enough walk, I'm like, oh, is that too long of a walk? I don't know if I should have done that.
Should I listen to a podcast on the walk?
Right.
Get something done.
Right. You gotta be productive, right? And I think this is actually what John Mark Comer really talks about, is this how the world has discipled us to be productive, to be life hackers, to find the shortcuts. And actually the deep work to build a meaningful company and a meaningful life, there are no shortcuts. Like you have to have an ability to slow down, to be thoughtful, to be introspective. And I mean, what I'm hearing from you is like, look, you found yourself, it wasn't intentional. It was just that life continued to get a little bit faster and a little bit faster. And oh, by the way, you have young kids. They go through different periods of time, right? And you're trying to be a good and faithful husband, and that takes time. Like relationships take time. Like there's just no way around it. And so if you don't ever have time, you're sacrificing 1, the ability to look at yourself, and 2, the ability to invest in relationships. And so it better be worth it. I haven't found many things that are.
Yep. I was saying to my wife during the time, I said, there are 3 things that I want to be good at. I want to be good at work, and I want to be good with our family, with you and with our kids. And I want to be good at me. I want to have time to go to the gym. I want to have time to, read for pleasure, like those types of things. And I said, it's not possible. I don't know. I can only do 2. I can't. And what I was doing is I was choosing my family and I was choosing my work. And I was really neglecting myself at the time. That's why I broke.
Yeah, let me challenge you. So do you think there's a way to build a Holdco and all the demands of what a Holdco has on the CEO and have that balance in your life? Do you think it's possible?
I do think it's possible. You have to go. What I don't know is whether it can be done. I think it is possible. And here's what I mean by that. I think it is possible, but in order to do it, you must totally delegate. You must actually be a Holdco, not an OpCo. And I think tons of people think they have a Holdco and they actually have an OpCo, and I include myself in this. I was CEO of the operating company. I was managing doers. And if you are not managing CEOs, you don't have a Holdco. I think, Brent, you were much better in this regard than I was. So I think you have to delegate totally. And I think you have to go half the speed you want to go. But the problem is all of the people who might build Holdcos are aggressive type A types who are going to want to go 2 or 3 times faster than they should and get their hands in everything and ensure success. So is it possible? Yep. Yes. Can it be done? I'm not sure.
Well, I think that I inadvertently received a gift in this area. So I agree. I want to go hard. I like to blow stuff up. I want to go build. And I didn't have resources. And when I say resources, I don't mean just financial. I didn't have talent around me. I didn't have the knowledge or skill set. I didn't even have the awareness of a lot of the stuff when I was first starting out. So I toiled away in obscurity for the better part of a decade, trying to figure all this stuff out and slowly but surely building. And I think what you just said there is half speed. I felt like I was going 1/10 of the speed that I could have, but I just didn't have the resources around me to do it. And inadvertently, I think that was the gift that has enabled Permanent Equity to be successful. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'm going to raise $50 million and start a Holdco. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So you're going to find investors. That's incredibly difficult to find somebody who's going to give you your money from scratch, $50 million right out of the gate. And you're going to have that from day one and go. I would have blown myself up. I would have for sure failed if I had been given $50 million 2 years in, 3 years in, even 5 years in. I would have been a disaster. And ironically, it would have felt amazing and it would have destroyed everything around me. And so that's what my advice now to people who want to build a Holdco is great. Plan on toiling away in obscurity for at least 5 years, if not 7. Go really, really slow. Buy one company. Perfect it. Get it to where it's humming and takes up very little of your time. Then go out and do it again and again and again and see if you can build a super organization above that. Because I always say buying one company is unbelievably difficult. Buying 2 to 3, 4 companies and getting a structure in place is 10 times more difficult than buying one company. And building a repeatable system and structure that can consistently find, negotiate, diligence, document, and operate companies at scale, it's almost no one's done it. And I mean, look, Permanent Equity is some ways is the ongoing experiment is if it's possible or not. I think it is. I think we're on a good trajectory, but man, some days it doesn't feel like it. I don't know.
I think you can look into private equity land, right? Who have been thinking and trying to do this for a long time. And really some of the only places it does work is if you're rolling up laundromats or rolling up a very specific templated business and you only buy that one thing and you just do it over and over and over and it's exactly the same.
Yeah. And you have to strip and standardize though, right?
Yeah.
You can't do that unless you strip and standardize.
You can't. But I think most people that want to start Holdcos, they want to build, everybody looks at Buffett and they go, I want this kind of non-correlated, I want some cash flow generating assets over here that fund the high growth bets over here. And what people don't think about is the stable cash flowing asset is a totally different business than the high growth software business that eats capital and compounds really fast, right? The skills for you to manage both are totally different. In fact, I think there are few people in the world that even can. So to try to graft those things together is wholly unnatural. And I think Buffett is sort of a freak. I mean, I don't know how many people have actually achieved it.
Well, and let's talk about when you say Buffett, what stage of Buffett? Because there's been 5 versions of Berkshire. Right. It's not like from day one, he was doing all the same stuff. I mean, it's been wonderful to study, but it's I don't really care kind of what he did after, 1985. Pre-1985, there's some interesting things about getting going and how he was doing, but he was highly involved in almost all the companies, all the major bets they've made, he's been highly involved in them. He hit a point which he couldn't scale. And so what do you do when you can't scale and you happen to have been successful and have a crap ton of money? Well, you change and you start espousing the wonderful virtues of leaving people alone and trusting them. Like he wasn't doing that in the 60s. Like he was highly invested, highly involved, very directive in his organizations. He was running an OpCo, not a HoldCo.
So it took him, what you're saying is 20 years to transition from OpCo to HoldCo.
Correct. Maybe longer than that, actually. I would say Buffalo News, I think was, and this could be, I could be off. It could have happened maybe the next investment, but I know Buffalo News like almost broke he and Munger. Do you remember when Buffalo News was?
No.
I can't remember if it was late 70s, early 80s. That experience for them, I mean, literally Buffett and Munger both had numbers of amount of money that they could pour into that business before they were broken, before they had to like shut it down. I mean, they were very close to having that business detonate and they were on site. They were highly involved. And I think that business, that combination of circumstances kind of made them say, okay, we don't want to do that again, right? I mean, that was not a good thing. And so I think that, over time we experience pain and that's how we grow, the adversity to grow. And like, I think they did that same thing. And when they created a formula that they thought worked and when they experienced incredible adversity based on the formula, they said, okay, let's take the good, let's leave the bad, let's continue to evolve and go down the road. And I mean, that's what they've done. And look, when you get to compound for, gosh, I don't know, what is he at? 75 years of compounding now? Like,
not bad. You can make a big number out of almost anything.
It's incredible to see what can happen over that period of time. Not to diminish, by the way, incredibly intelligent, driven. I mean, made a lot of tough choices and high opportunity costs in his personal life for the decisions he made, but like an incredible generational talent. So like not to diminish anything. I mean, of course, he's Buffett and Munger, like they're incredible.
Of course, yes.
So take us back to you come around, you're broken of this pride around your identity being tied to being the Holdco guy. You have this sort of personal realization that I can't run at the speed that I've been running. And you say, okay, I'm going to do what my investors have been asking me to do. And I'm going to get rid of everything else and shut down the Holdco and focus on one business. Like, what was that actual process? And maybe what were the highs of it? What were the lows? Do you feel like you're out of the woods yet in terms of that process?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're actually almost done. This process has been going on for kind of since May or June of 2022. So this is being recorded in April of 2023. So we're coming up on 12 months of sort of the de-Holdco, the demolition process of the Holdco. We got all the brands sold in kind of Q3 of last year, the last remaining brands. And we sold them. And, this process, which I'm about to describe, was one of the hardest things I've ever done, business-wise and emotionally, because we were growing Natural Dog Company so fast, too fast, I think my investors and I, in retrospect, would say, that we were running it very close to the red line. We were sucking all of the cash from everywhere else and then some to try to grow Natural Dog last year. So as we started divesting these things, we had to watch the bottom line very, very closely because there was a time when we came very close to running out of cash. We had to really manage this, as we're giving up our cash flow, you're getting cash in, but then you got to quickly reduce your overhead to match the new lower cash flow where you just burn all your proceeds. So we had to reduce the size of the team also from 55 to 25, kind of over Q3 2022. Which was very hard because, we had to let a lot of people go. We sold a lot of the brands sort of on a contribution margin basis, which without employees, which essentially meant that I had to fire the folks rather than the acquirer firing the folks. So I had to, do that. And we had to do it over 2 or 3 waves, which is never good culturally because, people wonder when they're next. But we got down from 55 to 25. And I really use it also as an opportunity to just say, like, I want to, at the end of this process, be left with people who are great, who I think are, outlier folks, who this is the top idea in their mind, that they can compound their area faster than I can compound it. And that frankly, I just, really like coming to work with, which is not to be underestimated. And we all do it. And it's so hard because you go, well, I want to hire the best people or I want to hire the right mix of people. But ultimately, if you don't like coming to work with your coworkers, you're not going to be happy, period. So that kind of Q3 was this, cut the team by more than 50%, unwind these businesses, try not to run out of cash. It was very, very harrowing. At one point, we actually needed a small amount of bridge capital to not screw it up, because I did screw it up. So I needed the bridge capital.
Yeah, it's so hard.
There's this dichotomy that both of you have been touching on in this conversation between moving slow and moving fast. And Bill, I'm thinking about this story that you were telling. It was actually on Chris Power's podcast about your detergent company. It started off as the cloth diaper detergent, and you rebranded it to have the right enzymes, to take out the nasty stuff on your gym clothes, Brent.
Yep.
And, I'm just caught in this moment. You were talking about how you had that product. It was really effective. You were maybe the first to market with it, if I'm understanding the timeline correctly. And you had great marketing around it. And you were doing a ton of direct to consumer sales. Am I getting the details right there?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the big kids jump in on the product and they start selling it. And you just had a comment of, I was thinking about, well, okay, what are we going to do with our next marketing campaign to make more money on this product? But really, we should have been thinking through, how are we going to innovate the product to continue to stay ahead, to continue to beat the big guys? And it represents an example to me of, if you had had the ability to move quickly there, you could have maybe won or kept that one going longer. And so kind of talk to me, maybe both of you, but I'll start with you, Bill. How do you make decisions on when it's time to move really quickly in order to win versus the posture of, I'm just going to do the right thing today? How do you balance that dichotomy?
Oh, man. David, that's a great question. And I'm glad you brought up Rock and Green, which is the detergent brand, because I think in hindsight is actually an example of where HoldCos fail. So, to set the stage, we kind of we bought this brand in 2016. And by 2018, we had pivoted it, and really we had product market fit. We had this detergent that people would use, basically you wear your Lululemon pants to the gym enough times, they start to smell and they become permanent gym pants. It builds up, right, in the clothes.
Yes.
And if you have these really expensive Lulu pants, like that bumps you out, because you also want to wear your cute Lulu pants to happy hour later, right?
Yeah, as Brent does, yeah.
Yeah. So picture that one.
Hot pants.
Exactly. So we kind of had this product market fit where this detergent would actually get the funk out of people's expensive pants. So we scaled this brand. We bought it. It was doing $500,000 in sales. And we scaled this brand to 8 or 9 million in sales in like a year, just on the back of product market fit here. And then the big guys showed up, to your point, David. But I wasn't looking. I was paying attention to something else, right? I was focusing on all the other brands and juggling all the balls in the air. And I had not set up our business where there was a highly competent executive team in place thinking about only Rock and Green all day long. Because if I had, they would have said, oh crap, here come the big boys. What do we need to do? We need new products. We need new innovation. We need new channels. We need to be going to retail. We need to stay out in front of this and actually build a brand. But because I was looking the other way, the business didn't die, but we missed a big opportunity to build a much larger brand in laundry detergent in retrospect.
I think this is a really underappreciated point of the journey to building, if you really want to build a Holdco. And by the way, I want to speak to people who are, if you're interested in building a Holdco, it's possible, but it's very counterintuitive how you actually get there. I can relate so much to that story. There have been times where I have just absolutely missed in the history of permanent equity. And when I found myself missing, I was like, okay, this isn't a sustainable model. I mean, this is basically what you found, Bill, right? And what you're saying is like, it's not sustainable. You can only think about one or two things in the shower, right? Just go back to the Paul Graham principle. If every company is dynamic, it's engaged in a dynamic system of competition, of changing consumer tastes, of macroeconomic forces as we've experienced, of, potentially world-changing viruses and how the impact of no one knows what's going to happen from that. Like, every business requires a high amount of focus that's continual over time in order to make it become what it could. And anytime you don't have that ability to focus on it, you're going to fall behind no matter what. Like, there's just really no exception. Creative destruction, like this is how it works. So when you're running an OpCo instead of a HoldCo, OpCo being, you're actively operating and involved in the operational decisions of the company, you are going to just get spread thin, and naturally you're going to gravitate towards things that are working, things that are fun, and sometimes even on the opposite side, fires that pop up. I mean, that's what I found, at least in my experience, was I was either working on things that I enjoyed or things that I demanded my time, but very little, going back to your burnout, the ruthless elimination of hurry, very little time that I could segment off and say, I want to be thoughtful. I want to be rested, and I want to be introspective about who I can be and how this organization can be the best. And so I feel like that there's a leap that has to occur, and it really comes again out of pain, where you basically go through a period of time and drawing down all of the free cash flow of an OpCo to build a HoldCo. I think that's the phase. And I think that's the phase that almost no one can get through. And like I said, I think permanent equity got through it by accident in many ways.
Would you describe permanent equity as a HoldCo?
I mean, functionally we are. I mean, the reality is we raise funds.
Yeah.
So we're a private equity. We have a fund model, and we're a private equity firm. We buy equity in private companies. A HoldCo, the hallmarks of a HoldCo are that you can recycle capital, that you can build a portfolio of long-term investments. So you typically don't have a short time horizon. The downsides of a HoldCo are it's really hard to raise capital, continue capital into it, and it gets complicated how to exit people out of it. And anytime you're entering or exiting, there's a valuation. Somebody's going to feel like they're getting the better end of the deal. It becomes challenging. Permanent equity, functionally is a HoldCo of HoldCos in the sense that each one of our funds operates as a HoldCo, but we're the manager of those HoldCos. And as we continue to raise funds over time, we will continue to expand the number of HoldCos that we raise over time, if that makes sense. I don't know. We're weird almost in every way. Organic.
That's what makes it so wonderful, Brent.
It's organic and dynamic.
It's organic and dynamic.
You use the word dynamic, everyone's like, oh, yeah.
Oh, dynamic. Yeah, for sure. Bill, going back to this idea of, getting through that dip, and was there an opportunity like the size of the detergent business, the anti-blue cheese product that you guys had? Was it possible that you could have hired, was the income statement big enough where you could have absorbed like a legitimate CEO of that business, that it was their responsibility to be waking up and thinking about it in the shower?
Almost, but not quite. And that,
right.
Brent, you probably read my annual letter. I think you sent me a nice note back. That was one of the core, I think, failing. So I wrote an annual letter at the end of 2022, kind of summarizing how this all went, right? Skip to the end. We sold all the brands. We survived. We just focus on Natural Dog now, and it has been the best decision ever. And we can get into why. But I wrote a letter to my investors, and I basically said, let's unpack the last 8 years, right? And how we got here and what we did well and what we did poorly. And one of the things I laid out that we got wrong was basically buying brands that were too small. And one of my big things, if I had a time machine and I'd go back and do it all again, I would not buy any business with less than $2 or $3 million of EBITDA for exactly the reason that you said, Brent, which is that any business smaller than that cannot support the $500K to $1 million a year of talent overhead that you need to put in an executive team.
Yeah, and it's really hard too. Let's say even at $2 million of EBITDA, it's really hard to go and spend $1 million of that on something that really is creating a quality of earnings increase, but at the expense of the quantity of earnings, at least in the short term. And so you get into these weird catch-22s where you're like, okay, we don't think there's an easy pathway to growing the business a tremendous amount. And we certainly don't want to take the hit in the near term, maybe 2, 3, even 4 years of decreased earnings in order to build back up. And so you get into this really odd situation where you need cash to come out. You want the business to quote unquote be successful. You want to show, whether it's your investors, your employees, that this thing is going well. And at the same time, that basically you're in a unsustainable competitive position that's requiring more and more and more of your mental energy, emotional energy. The stress and strain of operating, one business is unbelievably difficult, let alone operating a portfolio. And like you said, it becomes this catch-22.
Yeah, I mean, that is really, when you think about the entrepreneur who is starting a business, right? You start a business from nothing, and you're trying to compete with a whole bunch of these businesses that are something and are much bigger than you and have, highly compensated, highly competent executive teams. Your essential mission as the entrepreneur is to act as the $500,000 a year CEO as best you can, right? While making a fraction of that, so that you might have a hope to gradually build a team of much more highly compensated people than you around yourself. And then maybe one day eventually transition from CEO to chairman and finally replace yourself as the last piece of puzzle on the executive team, right? Like you are just trying to push the ball far enough down the field that you can get just barely big enough that you can afford to buy the same level of talent as your competition.
I think that's a really important point, and I want to pause on this for a second. The way you just honored other people and the competition is something that I find very rare in the Holdco, SMB, FinTwit world. It is, I see all the time people being like, people are idiots. Everyone's an idiot but me. Everyone doesn't know what they're doing. These big companies are full of morons. Like, competition's so easy. All you got to do is just get in there and it's obvious what you should do. And the reality is that most organizations, by their nature, if they're a bigger organization, they're doing something right. Like you don't get big by accident. And I should say is if you do happen to get big by accident, you don't stay big by accident. And so this is something that I had to learn because I think in my 20s, being brash, I'm like, well, I can compete with anybody. I can do whatever. And then you start meeting these people who are deeply thoughtful, very talented, very experienced operators who frankly are way better at it than I was. And I was like, oh, interesting. I would like them on my team and I would like not to battle them. But I think this is a common misconception. Like, yes, there are some opportunities if you buy a small business, especially on the lower end of the lower middle market, call it sub $2 or $3 million of earnings. There are going to be opportunities to improve the companies, but to go in and assume, one, that they're idiots, which is why they built this business and, done very well for themselves. And then two, that all their competitors are idiots. That is folly. That is pure pride. And you're going to get nuked. I can just assure you that.
Well, and also, where do you think you're going to hire people, right? By definition, you're trying to find good people that, they're employed somewhere and you hope they're employed in your industry and have relative experience. So almost by definition, they're employed at the competition. So definitionally, there are competent people, or you hope there are, at the competition, and maybe you can steal them. I think a lot of entrepreneurs tend to feel this way because a lot of entrepreneurs kind of come from the outside, right? We're kind of rebels by nature and, we maybe start young and we don't have a ton of corporate experience, or people get disillusioned because they did work with, there are plenty of idiots, right, in the world at big corporations also. And they go, oh, all these people here are idiots, and generalize, right? But I was lucky enough to spend the first couple of my years of my career at an investment bank and a private equity firm. And I worked with, the management teams of businesses that we were selling in my first role and businesses that we were investing in my second role. And they were highly compensated and they were highly competent. I mean, they were killers, right? And I went, man, there are a ton of wicked smart, competent people out there who are not entrepreneurs, who are never going to be entrepreneurs, who don't want to start their own business, but that you can employ in your own business. So on one hand, that's the big unlock. Oh my God, I can recruit these people? They're not all running their own businesses and impossible to recruit. Yeah, you can go recruit awesome people. But you also, the flip side of that is they're out there trying to kill you until you do.
Bill, in this journey from, I think earlier in the conversation, you talked about the year of simplification. That's what you've been going through the past 12 months. It sounds like, though, there's probably a lot of challenges in, the demolition of the Holdco.
Yeah.
You're the
Demolition Man.
The Demolition Man.
Yeah. Great movie from the 90s, by the way.
Yeah, one of the things is we're talking about talent and people that I'm just hearing. If you could give anyone advice having to go through a series of layoffs and slimming down, what did you do well? What did you do wrong? What would be your advice for people who have to let people go?
So a few of the things, there's two questions in there: is what's the right way to let people go? And then also strategically, what do you think about when you're shrinking the size of an organization?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just briefly hit how do you let people go, because I don't have original thoughts on this topic. If you want to know how to let people go well, Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, has an excellent chapter on how to do reduction in forces at your business, how to treat people with respect, how to make it human, how to, it's crappy all the way around no matter what. But his book really influenced me about how to do it right. Then the second part of that is, what do you kind of think about strategically? How do you do this? And I have to credit this to my director of marketing. He basically said, so this was a guy who I hired in kind of right before this was all going to go down. And he came in sort of knowing he was going to have to reboot things. And he came to me, he goes, Bill, everybody on this team can only do one thing. like they're specialists, right? Which is true, because as an organization gets bigger, each task, the hours in the week for the task balloon, and soon enough, just writing emails becomes a full-time job, or just paying bills becomes a full-time job, right? And so my director of marketing came to me and goes, Bill, everybody in this marketing department can only do one thing. There are no actual marketers in this marketing department. All they are is very narrow doers. And he goes, we're going to have to blow this whole thing up, because if I want to take this department from 14 to 5, he goes, I need 5 people who can do lots of things, who are dynamic, who understand kind of the first principles of marketing, and then why we write emails that way from those first principles, not somebody who just got trained in the skill of writing emails. And those can be, if you've ever hired people, you can hire a lever puller, or you can hire someone who understands why the lever is built, will pull the lever for now, and then eventually hire a lever puller. And they're not really the same person. So we actually had to turn over. So when I say we went from 55 to 25, it's not as simple as just letting 30 people go. Mm-hmm. It actually was almost complete turnover of the team in phases.
Gosh, that must have been brutal, man.
Yeah.
My heart just goes out to you. I've had the unfortunate task of letting go quite a few people through the years. And there's just something about when you're in that mode, it just hurts your soul. Like you feel like you're inflicting pain on people, and it is just the worst. It's the nastiest thing. How did you deal personally with that? Like, what was were you sleeping at night? Like, how are you getting through that?
I was not sleeping at night last summer, no. But, I unfortunately also, Brent, have been in that position quite a few times over my career, because a lot of times we've bought businesses that were in distress. And when you buy businesses in distress, it is often incumbent on you as soon as you walk in the door, to shrink the overhead of the business. So I've unfortunately had to do it quite a few times. I don't know how you deal with it, but for me, I think one of the uncomfortable truths of being CEO or being an entrepreneur, whatever title you want to use for yourself, is that, especially if you've never done it before, the first time you're CEO, you're going to learn to be CEO. You're going to learn through experience. And that means definitionally that you are going to screw up, and other people are going to get hurt. Like, you're going to screw up and you're not going to get fired. They're going to get fired. Right? It's going to impact, you hired the wrong person. You steer the company the wrong way. You built the team the wrong way. You as a CEO are going to goof a lot. As anybody learning how to do any skill would, you're going to goof a lot. And the perverse thing about the CEO role is, eventually maybe you get fired by the board, but usually other people get hurt. And that's just kind of one of the crappy things about being CEO, is you have to carry that around.
What were your coping mechanisms when you're going through that? Like, when you felt this, like, I'm sure just deep pain, and it's helter skelter. I'm putting myself in that mode that you were in, and it feels like chaos. And broadly kind of the direction you're trying to move the organization in, but stuff's happening. And by the way, you've got these organizations that you're trying to sell, and you're trying to run the operation that you're sticking with. And you're trying to keep these other businesses running in the meantime while you're selling them, while you're rebuilding the team. Like, practically, like, how did you deal with, like, what did you turn to? And by the way, maybe things that weren't healthy.
I tried all kinds of things. I tried pharmaceutical interventions. I tried therapy. I tried some alcohol. I tried hanging out with my wife. I tried aromatherapy. I tried all kinds of things, and none of them really worked for me. The thing that ultimately kind of worked is trying to open up to other people who had gone through, or I really thought might have gone through, because this is the thing about being vulnerable, as we kind of alluded at the beginning. Everybody wears the mask, right? But, once you've gone through it, like I've gone through a lot of stuff, but, I can kind of look at you, Brent, and go, Brent's been at this a while. He's in charge of a lot of things. Nothing ever goes perfectly. I bet Brent has some scars. You know what I mean? Even if I can't tell from Brent's Twitter account that Brent has some scars. And actually, I'm not implicating you personally here, Brent. I think you actually do a great job of being transparent. But so really, like, it involves taking what someone once told me, what's called the little leap of exposing yourself first and going, hey, man, like, you seem to have it all together, but, like, I'm really struggling. Like, can we just go out for a beer and talk? And then you get out to a beer with them, and you find out, they've got your stories and worse. And they made it through. So that was the only thing that helped me, was taking these little leaps, which was super freaking scary because, you got to approach people you respect, your friends or your really most likely professional acquaintances, right? And say, hey man, I'm in trouble, or, I'm struggling. Like, I just need to talk to somebody about it. And I found that obviously that's the last thing you want to do. You just want to bottle it up and you want to wear the mask and you want to tell everybody it's fine because you feel like in the short term that will medicate it. Maybe if I just, fake it till I make it, everything will be fine. But for me, kind of the way through was having conversations, open conversations with friends and sharing that I was struggling.
Yeah, I love that. There's such a fool's gold that I feel like we engage in. It's like we were so protective. Somebody once told me that a hurt soul does two things. It either self-promotes or self-protects, and oftentimes both, and within very short times of each other, right? And I felt this in my life, right? So it's like when I'm hurting, it's like I want to tell everyone how great I'm doing. I'm going to be very prickly about anybody who infringes on anything that I'm holding on to. And then I medicate, right? Like I'm in pain. I don't want to admit it to people. And so, for me, medicating through food has always been the thing that I would do. I just eat a ton. I mean, I remember I went through a period of time in my, late 20s where I was under so much stress that I wasn't even paying attention. I just literally didn't care what I ate. I was like, I just can't deal with this. I'm just going to eat whatever I want to eat because it gives me comfort in the moment. It helps me get through the day. And I put on like 40 pounds in probably 18 months. I looked at a picture, somebody took a picture with me, and I remember looking at it and being like, I literally don't recognize who's in that picture. I've gotten so big, and I was completely unaware of it. Like I didn't even realize it because I had such a goal-induced blindness, and I was so desperate to succeed, and I was in so much pain, and I was trying to broadcast to the world that I was doing great. Because maybe, again, fake it till you make it. And it's been this like beautiful journey since then where I've realized that the more vulnerable I can be and the more honest I can be. And a lot of times, like, I don't have the courage to do this, just being honest. But man, if there's anybody out there who's hurting, the path is not to numb it out. The path is not to engage in the big horsemen of coping these days, right? Like Netflix, like you can watch, an entire series, you can binge. You maybe can get distracted for a while. It's not going to actually help the pain. It's going to come back. Alcohol, food, pornography, all these things are just methods to try to feel something and not feel the thing that's so hurtful. The thing that is the antidote, right, that you just said is relationship. And the only way into meaningful relationship is through vulnerability and through being honest about who you are, taking off those masks and saying, hey, look, I don't even maybe know how I feel. I feel terrible. I don't even know how I feel. And I feel like, especially for men, it's really hard to name for the most part because I think it's like 70% of the population that's male, biologically male, is a thinker, and 30% are feelers, whereas women, it's 70% are feelers and 30% are thinkers. So for most men, thinking comes first. And I'm actually curious, Bill, I'm a thinker first. I don't know if you are too, but like, it's hard to tap into emotion sometimes. Like I actually really struggled. I'm like, I feel feelings. I don't know what these feelings are. And then I get angry and get frustrated and I take it out on people around me. Like, do you ever do that?
I'm absolutely a thinker. We use a personality index called Culture Index at work, and I'm a very high logic score and a very high what's called the A trait. It's the kind of the emotion, the internal drive, the desire to win. Conflict tolerant. Like if that's the wrong answer, I'm just going to tell you it's the wrong answer and not expect that it will hurt your feelings, right? Because you want to win too, right? And you just care about the answer. And so I'll just often steam right over all people's feelings, thinking, oh, aren't we just all in this room to get to the right answer?
Yeah, exactly. A good friend who's going to be on the podcast here in a few weeks, his name's John Marsh. He at one time called me out and said, you have a giant brain, huge brain, tiny little chicken heart, little baby heart, little tiny heart, like beating in there, but little baby heart. Like I have to really work on punching that up. Yeah,
me too. I mean, I had actually a great mutual friend of ours, Andrew Udarian, Brent. He was one of the people, Andrew Udarian from E-commerce Fuel. Has become a really good friend of mine. And unfortunately, he doesn't live in Charlotte, so I did this all remotely. I just called him and I kind of told him what I was going through and we talked. And then like a month later, he remembered, and Andrew is one of just the best people I've ever met. He remembered and he sent me a letter, a handwritten letter. And it just said like, hey, Bill, I'm thinking about you. You're a good person. you're trying really hard. I know it doesn't always feel like you're a good person and you're hurting other people, but I've known you for a long time and you're a good person and you're trying to do this the right way and it's going to be all right. And he included these little handmade caramels from where he lives. And it must have taken him, 10 minutes to do. But I still have that note on my bulletin board. And it made such a big difference to me. So much to the point that I now, with my own tiny little chicken heart, I try to reach out. A friend of mine, kind of wrote on Twitter even last night or the night before, hey, I'm buried, like I'm just working hard. And when somebody writes, I'm buried, like it's one of those tough weeks on Twitter, that it's real bad, right?
Yeah. If you're showing weakness on Twitter, it's like the house is on fire, it's burned down. There may be only studs left at this point.
Yeah. And so I just sent him a text message and I was like, hey man, I see it's tough for you. I want to let you know, this life we've chosen, a roller coaster, like you'll be back on the mountaintop eventually, like hang in. And we had led to a really nice conversation, and it strengthened that friendship. But it's just so hard for me to remember to do those things. So going through that hard time last year, I think has maybe grown the chicken heart a little bit.
I think there's an element, Brent, as I'm thinking through this podcast that we're on, and Bill, I'm sure your guys' podcast, where we're wanting to model that vulnerability. If we could do anything in this podcast, we want to do a lot of things in this podcast. But if we could help people see that taking that step of vulnerability, and it does take courage, it does take humility, and it is scary, but it's not that scary. It's the little leap, right, that you said, Bill. And if we could give permission for people to take that step with people in their life, like that would be a wonderful impact from these kinds of podcasts. It's not just business talk. We're trying to help equip people to flourish as people.
Yes. Well, it's tough, right? Because it's so it's always just stop thinking of yourself as a person and just start thinking of yourself as, Bill D'Alessandro, CEO, Elements Brands. And you're just like playing this character, and to try to come back to, I am a person. I have feelings. Sometimes it's really hard. And just to be a whole person. And frankly, it's easier. I mean, the mask is freaking heavy. Like it's really hard to be logically consistent, to remember what you said to who, to remember kind of which spin on the truth you actually gave to each person. It's just way easier to go, this is me, take it or leave it.
Yeah. In a way too, though, it's for their benefit, right? I mean, that's what I hear you saying. It's easier for you, but I feel like there's this transparency that some people can take on, which is like, this is me, deal with it, right? And it's like a very bombastic it excuses bad behavior. Right. And that's not at all what I'm hearing from you. And I want to make sure that, anybody who's listening to this doesn't think that's what we're advocating for. Like we're advocating for an honesty and openness.
Yeah.
Maybe actually not transparency, which is actually a really interesting debate that probably now is not the right time to talk about, but
we talked a little bit about it with Claire Hughes Johnson.
We did talk about Claire.
This podcast we're talking on right now will come out after her.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Go back and listen to that. We had this conversation about transparency, and yeah, Bill, I just want to encourage you, man. And I just want to say thank you for the model that you're setting for a lot of us. Like I look up to you in many ways. And I think that, the way that you've handled adversity is way more impressive than the way you handled success. It's like, it's like, and this is, I guess, the irony, right? Like everyone thinks that it's going to be the glittering, shiny, sparkly things that people are like, ooh, I want to be around Bill because he's sparkly. It's like,
he is sparkly.
But it's actually not that builds, like you can be envious of the sparkle. You can't have a relationship with the sparkle. And so I feel like I want to
preach, man.
Yeah. I want a genuine relationship with you more than a business relationship. And I think that's where the more that we can encourage people, like, what if business is the excuse? Like, what if actually business is not the point? And I don't know, this is something I've been chewing on. This is a little bit of a, soliloquy diversion here that we may go on, but like, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, why are we in business? At the end of the day, I've never heard somebody at the end of their life say, you know what? I wish I had worked more. Now, I think that's easily misinterpreted, and I want to say why. I think that can be misinterpreted as, we shouldn't work as much. I don't think that's actually what the purpose of that is. Like, I think that we are called to work really, really hard our entire lives. I don't think, as a Christian, I don't think I can ever retire, or at least what retirement is for most people, because I don't think that we're ever called to retire. Like, I think that we always should be working.
I mean, there's math around this, Brent. Like people retire and their life expectancy shorten.
Right, which is a consequence, right? But I think that what it means that I never wish I'd worked more actually means, what if instead of the emphasis on achievement and success, yes, that will come hopefully from treating people well. Like, what if we used work as the excuse, as you said, Bill, to be able to form meaningful relationships and enjoy the people that you work with? What if you could have true, authentic relationships, whether it's within your company or without? I think this is maybe a little bit where, you know, your co-host of your podcast, Girdley, and I think very much disagree on this topic. Like, he is very adamant and interested in telling everyone that businesses are not family, and don't try to pretend that they are. That, like, somehow he sees family, like calling people family members that work in a business together as sort of like, I think, deceiving people, right? Or trying to like pull one over on them. And like, look, I understand where he's coming from in some ways. In other ways, I think that kind of puts you into a heart posture that is hardened and mask wearing in a way that I worry about. Like, I did not think of people that I worked with as family members early on, and I hurt a lot of people and treated them very poorly. And I think that I genuinely now, whether it's in the company or outside, try to treat them as my neighbor, right? As a Christian, that's a kind of language for how can I treat them as somebody who I'm honoring, who I'm respecting, who I'm trying to encourage? How do I treat them as a person, as the end and not the means? And I think that, at least in my opinion, treating people, when I hear people say, hey, we want to treat these people that we work with as family, it gets a lot closer to treating them as your neighbor than sort of treating them as a widget, as just a resource to be used up and then discarded. So I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
I have thoughts here. So I actually think you're both right.
That can't be. I'm right. Girdley's wrong.
Well,
no,
I think in some contexts you're wrong, and I think in some contexts he's wrong.
Oh, I'm just kidding.
So, I mean, and for me, we've gone through this journey here at Elements Brands, now Natural Dog Company, is that we were a little bit more family in the early days. And it led to kind of a tolerance, you know, because you have your family, you love them unconditionally. But at work, you need to hold people accountable, you know, at times. And you have high goals, and you're trying to achieve things together. You don't necessarily always try to achieve things with your family. I think a lot of times when a business is marketing itself as we are a family, we treat our employees like family, I think that is usually a red flag. However, I think the best businesses are like high-performing sports teams. And Brent, I don't know if you ever played competitive sports, or David.
I would say poorly. I played competitive sports poorly, but yeah.
Team sports? Have you played team sports?
Yeah, I loved soccer and basketball growing up, for sure.
Yeah, so for those listening that have played team sports, you know, I played football growing up, and, you know, by the end of the season, you know, those teammates are, you know, people will refer to themselves as my brothers on the team, like extremely close. It feels like family, but it's not family because you're there to win. And if your teammate is missing the weight room session, you're going to get on him. I've seen guys get heated, but it's not because they don't love each other. It's because we're here to win. So I think the best businesses function as highly competitive teams and then allow themselves to build those familiar bonds. Like my COO, Brian, who has been here now for almost 6 years, I absolutely consider that. I'll say, like, love you, man. Like, see you next week. You know, I know his kids. You know, we actually live in the same neighborhood. Like, we are tight. But, like, we will also get into it in a meeting. You know, like, if he thinks I'm wrong, or he thinks I'm, like, slacking, you know, and vice versa, like, we're going to let each other have it. And he played football growing up, too. And, like, that's the understanding we have. So I think that's the balance. Like, I think you have to start from a place of we're a high-performing team on the first day of the season, right? You've all been recruited here because you have a certain set of skills. You're a great wide receiver. You're a great linebacker. We're all here to try to do something together. And then you got to allow yourself, as you perform and people stay around, let yourself get close. Let yourself build those really tight bonds. And that's, you know, the real bliss when you've got a team, a work team that's been together for a long time, that trusts each other and is really tight and can do things outside of work and really like it. But I still don't think family is the word I'd use to describe it.
I think that's totally fair. And I actually want to fast forward in the narrative that we've been going on with your journey to get down to just Natural Dog Co. And I want to hear about what you guys are doing now. I think we've kind of touched on it, but just give us an update on how this year of simplification has gone to get us to month 12. Where are we at, and where are you going?
Yeah, so we got all the brands sold kind of by Q3 of last year. And we have spent the last 6 months just dismantling all the infrastructure, like deleting all the fields in the ERP that let you tell which brand is which, right? Because there's only one brand. Changing everything Elements Brands to everything Natural Dog Company. and kind of for me getting replugged in, deep into all the things that are actually going on and understanding our competitive place in the market and where our industry is going and all that stuff. And as a result, in 6 months, I mean this, we have made easily 2 years of progress. What would have taken us 2 or 3 years under the old regime, because instead of a mile wide and an inch deep, I, as the CEO, and my executive team, Brian and our head of marketing and everybody, we are just think about one thing. All of a sudden, Natural Dog Company is the top idea in the mind of a really awesome team. So it's not just me. It's the top idea in the mind of everybody on the team. And we are moving at freaking warp speed. And I'm relaxed as hell.
I was going to ask, has the subtraction actually had the additive result you wanted?
Yeah. I talked to other people on the exec team too, and everybody's like, this is bliss. I feel like I changed jobs. I feel like I work at a totally different company. This is really fun. We have enough time to sit back and really savor it, like when we do win, and we know how we're going to win 3 months from now and 6 months from now and 12 months from now, et cetera. And it's just, we are able to get into this kind of craft building mode rather than this hair on fire mode. And you can actually start to go pretty quick in craft building mode once you start building momentum. But when you're in hair on fire mode, you never build momentum in any direction because you're going every single which way all at once. And I think we're really starting to hit our stride now, momentum wise.
If I called up your wife and I said, "Hey, off the record,
I know where you're going.
Off the record, is Bill in a better spot? Like, how are things at home?" What would she say?
I think she'd say yes, undoubtedly. I mean, not to say I'm perfect. I still, have my struggles, and sometimes I'm on my phone when I shouldn't be. But absolutely, what I said earlier, I said I felt like I only had time for 2 things out of 3, family, business, and self. But the thing that I realized was I thought I was picking family and business, but I was really doing a crap job at family, right? Because I was just not there. I was at a total mess of a place. I was barely present. I was dealing with extreme anxiety, maybe some depression, I don't know. And just so that was all spilling over, right? Of course, onto my wife, who was just trying to love me and raise a family with me. So I think she would definitely say, I'm just not spewing all of that into my family relationships anymore.
Yeah. Let me ask about that, because this is something I think a lot about. I'm thinking about what you've shared about your story the last several years. I mean, you've built habits in your body. You've wired your brain to be on fire and playing whack-a-mole and going. What is your strategy to not just operate in that place again going forward? How are you not just going to fill all the space again and fill all the mental and I got to go do this? What's your strategy for that?
Oh man, that is super hard, because you're exactly right. Like, it is a chemical wiring, an addiction to complexity, to success, it's an addiction
That's
to
right.
yes.
That's exactly
right. It's addiction to saying yes to the next thing, right? And I think for me, it was really important to realize and name it. Like, Bill, you are addicted to doing. Like, you are excitable. Like, and it's not necessarily bad. It's not. It is a drug, but not in like a,
right.
But it's an addiction. And if you want to quit an addiction, you got to recognize it, right away. And so for me, it is really hard. And I've had to turn down over the last 6 to 12 months some really interesting things. Brent, I actually brought you that one deal that I wanted to do, and I don't think you guys were able to do it either. But I brought it to you, and it pained me even to bring it to you, because I said, "Oh, this is the deal I want to do so bad," right? Yeah. And I even said to you, "Will you let me invest and like somehow participate?" And that was even me being weak in the moment, right?
Well, I took it as a compliment. Oh, was that, did I misinterpreted that? I thought you just maybe wanted to be partners. But
yes, well, I did. I wanted to.
No, okay.
That's what's so insidious. How great would it have been, right? To be partners on this really cool business.
Yeah.
It would have ultimately meant I said no to a lot of other things. I went to breakfast with another guy, Andrew Ferris, and I was talking about this, and he goes, "Bill, what you got to realize is every time you say yes to something, you say no implicitly to something else." And he said, for me, he said, a lot of times I say yes to something at work, I'm implicitly saying no to my wife. I'm saying no to my kids. I'm saying no to something else, because that hour that I spent on that phone call or on that whatever is an hour I didn't go home earlier.
Yeah, I would also say the corollary to that is I found that great deals, quote unquote, deals of a lifetime, come more frequently than you'd expect. And so I had this mentality early on where I was like, "Oh, it's a deal of a lifetime. I've got to do this one. It's just, this is an exception to the rule." And turns out when you make exceptions all the time, that ends up being the rule, right? And so like the ability to not only say, hey, by saying yes to this, I'm saying no to a bunch of other stuff, but also I can let even some fat pitches, like let them go and just let somebody else. I mean, like I had a conversation with somebody the other day and like they were getting rich in this very interesting way. And I said to them, they're kind of like the implicit thing was like, man, wouldn't you want to be doing this? I said, I am 100% happy to watch you get really, really rich doing something that I have no interest in doing. That's great for you. And I feel like that is the major problem is especially for like the pioneering type personality, watching other people do well in something that's interesting to you because everything's interesting becomes a real problem and you end up wanting to do even more and kind of expand the boundaries.
Yep. Totally. Because you're like, oh, and I mean, this comes with, as you do things for a while, you start to realize like I could, if I applied my energies, probably get good at that. Over time, over years, not like over months, but like, wow. And you start to wonder like, geez, could I do that too? Like, is that better than the thing I'm currently doing? Maybe I could get even more rich doing that other thing. And then you just end up eventually chasing the shiny object all the time.
All right. So Bill, from time to time, we do something called a lightning round and we want to get your hot takes, short, abbreviated hot takes on some latest and greatest things. But today I want to do it a little bit differently. I want to get your hot takes specifically in advice for small business owners and operators. You've seen a tremendous amount. You've worked across every discipline in business. You have, I know through our conversations, you have competency in almost every area. You're stronger in some, weaker in others, but like competency for sure in every area. So I want to make sure our listeners are typically business owners and operators. I want to help them get better at the very end of this and take all the wisdom you've learned through buying companies, building a Holdco, demolishing a Holdco, refocusing on a business. I want to get all that kind of like juice down to something that is actionable for them. So I'm going to go through topics and I want you to think whenever I give you the topic, think about what is the one or two pieces of advice that you want to give owners in each one of these areas. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Hiring.
Use personality profiles. People don't change.
Ooh, man, that is, I like this.
We could do a whole new podcast on every answer.
Hot
takes.
takes.
Asked for it and you asked it for short. I could do a whole podcast on that topic, but that's the sum.
What's your go-to tests? What are the ones you like the most?
We use one called Culture Index. Michael Gurley recommended it to me, and it has changed the way I do people. It's unbelievable.
All right. Business owners often say marketing doesn't work. What would you say to them?
That's ridiculous. Marketing works very well, but only if you have something people want to buy. In fact, it even works short term if you don't have something people want to buy, but it does eventually catch up to you.
Let's say that they have a business that is working, quote unquote. They have a product that people want to buy and they just can never hire people who they're not marketers themselves. And they've hired agencies. They burn through 4, 5, 6 agencies. They can't seem to find the talent, internal, external, to help them grow their marketing. What advice do you have for them?
That you cannot outsource brand. You cannot outsource, like you are trying to outsource the job of the CEO. You are trying to outsource the articulation of your value proposition to your core customer. You can't hire that out. No agency will ever care as much as you. You can hire, I'm really trying not to go long. But
no, go long.
You're good. We're here with you.
Go.
So very many entrepreneurs are not intrinsically good at marketing, which is fine. Plenty of people are not. And they go, what I want to hire is I just want like the easy button. Like, can I just hire an agency that will like do marketing, quote unquote marketing, right? So I can just check that box off and focus on the thing that I really love, which is like making products or like, doing the delivery, the fulfillment of the product or whatever it is. But you as a CEO, you've got to be a little at least competent in all the areas. And so even if you hire an agency, if you hire them and just like leave them in the corner and you're like, go do marketing, they're going to fail because they've got 10 other clients and you are not the top idea in their mind. So they are never going to have the epiphany about your business because they've got 10 other clients. You have to, if you hire an agency, like have weeklies with them, have monthlies with them, manage them like an employee, like with KPIs, and like you cannot abdicate marketing as a CEO. I'll leave it there.
When as a business owner and operator should I bring on capital to help me grow? And when should I just gut it out, go slow, and compound?
You should bring on capital when you're absolutely sure that you can deploy capital in a way that is accretive. Not like you think you could go buy a business, but like, I'm going to buy this one, right? Or I've already bought 2 just like one, and now I'm going to go buy 10 more just like the 2 I've already done. Like you should, raising capital, I think people, and this comes from venture capital, like the California, Silicon Valley mindset, where raising capital is the first thing you do. I think raising capital is like the last thing you do. And by the way, you'll give up less of the company too if you wait longer.
When should I sell my company?
When you don't like it anymore, or when you feel like someone else can compound it faster than you can.
If I'm going to sell my company and I know nothing about this, I've never sold a company before, what would you recommend I do as like next steps? Who should I hire? How should I go about that process?
This is a self-serving question. You didn't even know it. I have recommended the Messy Marketplace to so many people who want to sell their business as like a first step to understand what it would really involve. So I'd say read the Messy Marketplace. And 2, for the love of God, hire an intermediary. Hire a broker. They will easily offset their fee, not just in misery, but probably also in valuation. Hire a broker or intermediary investment bank, whatever you want to call it, with expertise in your industry that has sold businesses like yours before, and that are the scale of your business as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's ironically, I think many people think that somehow we're in competition at Permanent Equity with intermediaries, and we love intermediaries. Great intermediaries are wonderful. Mediocre to bad intermediaries are awful. So just my caveat addition to that is just choose wisely. Get to know them.
Do they kill good deals?
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I mean, Bill and I could probably sit here and
because they
tell
just
you,
want to get like an agent. They want to get the bigger contract so they get more money.
and they're depending on who you hire. I mean, it's like anything else. The talent level and the ethics of people in this area are very wide. And so, yeah, I mean, we would have probably bought 5 businesses in the last 5 years if it wasn't for an intermediary that we just literally could not get past all of their garbage. It was awful. Okay, Bill, so I want to go out as an owner, operator, and acquire another company. What warnings do you have for me?
Don't overpay. You are executing from a place of low information, and the seller is executing from a place of high information. So you need to have a margin of safety for all of the things that he is going to get over on you. You're just never going to figure it all out in diligence, no matter how good you are. So make sure you have a margin of safety, which is why you don't overpay or use too much leverage, and diligence the people deeply.
Let's talk about debt. My current business doesn't have much debt, if any debt on it, and it's sure is attractive. People could tell me that I can just finance an acquisition purely out of debt. How much debt's too much debt for a business?
That entirely depends on the cash flow profile and stability of the business. I would say the amount of debt that is too much debt for a business is the amount of debt that causes you to lose sleep.
I like that.
That causes you to manage the business to support the debt rather than manage the business. I do not think that number is 0, but there are a lot of companies that are leveraged beyond the point I just described.
Are there any software systems or tools out there that you think every business should be using, no matter how, like, let's say every small to medium-sized business should be using?
Oh, a project management system of some type. Asana, ClickUp, Trello, something. I would even go so far, you wanted a hot take, here it is. I think people should stop using Slack. I think Slack is like...
Oh, you're preaching Brent's language there. He's getting all excited.
I mean, I may or may not have called Slack a shittier version of email like 1,000 times.
I'm not there, so tell me, you gotta defend that one. Tell me why.
So because, first of all, it leads to interruptions. You guys have probably seen Microsoft did this whole study about like when somebody gets interrupted, it takes them like 2 hours to get back to the original task, back into the state of flow. Interruptions are devastating.
But couldn't that be a text or an email interruption as well?
Well, yes, but emails are generally not so instant response. There's something about, and I would put text message, by the way, in the category of Slack, like that instant chat, like I have a conversation with you that goes on for an hour, like every 5 minutes. Right? Yeah. Neither of us got anything done for that hour. The other thing that Slack encourages is shallow thought. Email, on the other hand, encourages deep thought because you can actually write like several paragraphs unpacking the topic, right? And presenting all the data you found. So if you go to email with a set of norms around email, like how to write a good email, what's the default decision you're going to make if the person doesn't get back to you, all that stuff, I think email can be really great. Slack encourages this kind of like we're around the water cooler all the time. Also, the search in it is terrible. Where search and email is pretty good. File, all that stuff. You just lose things in Slack. So I think like the trifecta is email, Asana, we use Asana. I'm not just specifically preaching that one, but we use Asana for project management. And you can have conversations on threads for the tasks in Asana. So everything is in one place, and then a really well-organized Google Drive or Dropbox.
What are the easiest ways you've seen most businesses could cut costs and actually increase the quality of the business?
Too many people. Too many people, not A players. This was another thing. When we shrunk our business, the several A players emerged and they were like, oh my God, finally. And they started contributing 3x what they were contributing before because they get so disillusioned. They watch all the B and C players put in B and C work and not get fired. And they go, all right, I'll check out too. And to watch my A players check back in has been awesome.
Business owners are starting to hear about AI, ChatGPT, all of these LLM models that are starting to take over. And I think many of them at this point are still thinking this is the new crypto, this is the new blockchain, this is the new Web3, this is the new NFTs. What is your take on AI and how tuned in should the average small to medium-sized business owner and operator be on this topic?
Very. This is the singularity. I'm pretty convinced.
So this is it. I mean, like this is not a dress rehearsal. This is not a fire drill. Like we are sitting in 1993 right now, and we've just heard about this thing called the internet. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but 10 times bigger. I think we are 5 to 10 years from really not even recognizing what's going on.
Okay, walk me through. I want to actually deep dive. So that'll be the last question of the lightning round. I actually want to deep dive actually into this topic before we go to our final question. Walk me through practically, where do you think this is going? What are the implications? Why did you just say it's a 10x of the internet?
It's a 10x because the internet helped us do a lot of things that were previously inefficient in an efficient way. We took out a lot of paper, but fundamentally we're still doing a lot of the same things just with technology. Instead of faxes, we're doing it with instant internet. But AI I worry that it is going to raise the bar of how good you need to be to contribute value to society to a point that most people will not clear it. And that's what really scares me, because there are a large number of people who do jobs today that ChatGPT is better than them at today. And this is the worst that it will ever be. I mean, just look at the leaps from GPT-2 like 18 months ago to GPT-4 this month. It is unrecognizable. Run this forward 5 to 10 years. How old is the iPhone? I think is coming on.
It's 2007.
Yeah,
right.
So it's
15 years.
15 years old. The iPhone's 15 years old, and honestly, the iPhone hasn't really changed in the last 5 years for the most part. Yep. That first 10 years, think of no iPhone to kind of 5 years ago. So no iPhone to like 2018. How much did the iPhone change the world? Insanely, right?
Yeah.
10 years. We're talking about a technology now that is better than, I'll pick a really low number you won't argue with me on, better than 10 to 20% of the people in America at their jobs now.
Yep.
Run that forward 10 years. And the other thing that's important to note is you don't need 100% unemployment to totally break the social contract. 20% unemployment and it's mayhem.
Yeah. Yeah. I equated it the other day that right now, today, it's like having an unlimited number of 22-year-old Harvard-educated college graduates at your disposal. And I think that the interesting part about that is next year it'll be 25-year-olds, and next year it'll be 27-year-olds, and 10 years from now it could be 45-year-olds, where it's like people that are highly educated, intelligent, great researchers, and can think their way out of a lot of problems and kind of intuitively know what you want and go get it done. Like right now, I think we've got 22-year-olds on our hands, maybe 23-year-olds. I think when that starts crossing into, and by the way, there's a lot of jobs, if you want to think about that way, that I think you just said, there's a lot of jobs that a really well-educated, hardworking 22-year-old college grad from Harvard could do better than 10 to 20% of America, right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, let me give you, or how about this? I'm an investor in a business that makes the hardware on the back of picture frames, so like metal hooks and D-rings and whatnot. We have a team in the Philippines that runs it. And when we list them on Amazon, they write their English second language, good English, but fairly utilitarian descriptors on Amazon. Like this is a D-ring for the back of a picture frame. The dimensions are blah, 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 right? What I did is I took the output from the Filipino team and I put it into ChatGPT and I said, make the following product description bullets more salesy. And what it did is it took their utilitarian English and blew it out into something indistinguishable from an American like marketing Amazon-focused copywriter. because guess what? It's ingested every product listing ever, right? And so what it did is it turned my $5 an hour Filipino into an $80,000 a year American.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. If you're I'm trying to be empathetic towards older, maybe on the tail end of their careers, business owners and operators who are thinking, oh my gosh, like it's creating anxiety in me to think about how much this is going to change. What advice do you have for them on like how can they survive? How could maybe they thrive? Like what actionable steps would you advise people take today if they're listening to this and say, okay, I believe you guys. What do I do now? Like what next?
So, this is the hard thing about singularities, right? Is it's really hard to kind of see through them definitionally. For me, sort of one of my theses on this is that the price of content and the price of almost knowledge work, but really I'll confine it to content, the price of content is going to zero, which means that if you are in the business, and either your whole business does this or you as a individual worker, this is your career. If you're in the business of creating content, I mean this written word, photography, computer code, if you create content, you need to find a different job.
David, you're going to have to go back to being a hand model.
It's just really hard. I don't know if you've seen like some of the image generation stuff. I, on Twitter, tried this tool. I uploaded like 10 or 15 pictures of me, and it spit out 100 pictures of me that had never been taken in different locations and different outfits that were almost indistinguishable from real photographs.
In all seriousness, like we have a couple businesses that rely on photography, and we're just not using custom photography anymore. We know we can plug in, here's exactly what we want. And you iterate a couple times on it and it spits out exactly what you want.
So the corollary to that is I believe that the best way to insulate yourself from this is to do what I call get as close to the metal as possible. And what I mean by that is as close to the means of production, as close to the means of manufacturing or service delivery or moving atoms around as absolutely possible, because those are going to be the hardest things to disrupt. Like, for example, how much, Brent and David, of the American economy is essentially built around the fact that the Chinese, who own most of the means of production at this point now in 2023, right? All the factories, all that stuff. But what they don't know how to do is sell to an American consumer. So how much of the entire American economy is essentially taking stuff that is made in China and repackaging and marketing and running Super Bowl ads to American consumers to sell it at 10 times the price, right? That is essentially what we've signed up for as an American economy over the last 20 to 40 years of our industrial policy. So we'll take the picture frame example. Now, ChatGPT allows those Chinese factories to sound like an American copywriter. What do they need you for?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what I mean by get close to the metal. Like for us, like we are a dog brand, but you know what? We don't manufacture stuff. And that's starting to scare me because eventually this AI will be so good that our contract manufacturer, who is here in America, by the way, but the reason they're a contract manufacturer and not a brand is because they are terrible at marketing and branding. But what is marketing and branding if not content? And the price of which is going to zero.
Yeah, I've said that it's gonna make relationships and physical things, anything physical product, which is, get close to the products is exactly what you're saying. It's like it's gonna make those infinitely more important, and it's gonna make everything else infinitely less important. All right, I think that we should actually have Bill back on, David, at some point to riff on just AI, the future of business. I think that'd be a fun topic. I do want to end with a question for you, which is, if you could go back and talk to your 25-year-old self.
He actually already answered this question on Twitter, and he said he would come work in the Permanent Equity New Analyst program.
Oh, did you?
I would.
Oh, that's. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. We would love to have you, 25-year-old Bill. So if you could go back to your 25-year-old self and let's say have a dinner with him, a long dinner, 2-3 hours, what would be the topics you'd talk about, and what advice, counsel would you give to 25-year-old Bill?
Oh man, first I would spend many hours preparing for that dinner, which you have not given me. I think one of the things in my life that I did start to figure out in my 20s and that I've done pretty well on hewing to is be deliberate in what you want. Like articulate it and go get it. And for me this was a concept that came from the 4-Hour Workweek. This sort of idea of lifestyle design. What do you want? And always be measuring your outcomes around the stated goal, against the stated goal. And if you're not making it, which I was not, by the way, a couple of years ago, like that is the time to make a change. Do not wait for the breaking point or for the external thing that forces you to. Proactively course correct towards the goal frequently.
Okay, we've got something exciting coming up. It's called Main Street Summit, and I just wanted to take a moment to tell people about it.
I haven't been more excited about something in a long time. I got to be honest. It's keeping me up at night. So we want to be the big umbrella collection place for small and medium-sized business owners, operators, and investors. That's the big idea. And you'd think this already exists out there. It doesn't.
I feel like I see a lot of events like this, trade shows. You can walk the floor in your suit and tie.
Yeah. Well, but there's nothing that's focused on small and medium-sized businesses. There's a lot of verticals out there, and there are small and medium-sized business events, but there's nothing that really unites the whole ecosystem. So when we think of small and medium-sized businesses, these are not necessarily the dress shop, the bagel shop, the local businesses. They might be, but those businesses at scale, right? So we want to have kind of businesses of 20 people to 500 people that are coming together and learning from each other, potentially meeting their new partners, new investors, finding talent. Like we want to be the collection point of the ecosystem that's involved in this. So there'll be some big companies that are focused on small business. There'll be a lot of small businesses that want to get bigger. The way we like to talk about it in our office is every big business started small. So every big business started somewhere on Main Street or near Main Street. And so we want Main Street Summit to be those people from around the country, around the world. And the response has been unbelievable. I mean, we've literally at this point only sent out, 2 tweets?
Like a save the date.
It was like basically a save the date.
Very basic website.
And we have 1,200 people who've raised their hand and said they want to come. So we're super excited about it. If you listen to this and you say, hey, I potentially want to come to this, reach out to us, go to mainstreetsummit.com.
Yep.
There's a sign up there. Think about participating. We're going to have lots of different verticals. We're going to have high growth verticals. We're going to have more low growth verticals by industry. We're going to have by interest. So there's going to be lots of opportunities. If you fit into the owner, operator, or investor bucket, or service providers up for those, we're going to have something for you to do. And it's in Columbia, Missouri, November 8th and 9th.
Can you give a taste of what the price point on tickets will be?
Yeah, so you're part of this discussion. We tried to make the price literally as low as we possibly could and have a shot at not losing our shirt. So that was the goal. The goal is we want to include this big tent. We want to include everyone. We want price not to be the problem. So it's $500 for a ticket. That's as low as you can possibly get. There's no other events out there that are anything like this, a festival, for $500. So we wanted to make it as low as possible. And we want people to be included.
That's great. Can you give me a taste then of what someone might experience over those 2 days when they come to Columbia, Missouri?
Think of it as, you got food and wine festivals, you got film festivals. Think of it as a festival of like you're doing something intermittently through a couple days. So what we're going to have is we're going to have talks, interviews, presentations, workshops, all about whatever your interests are in small and medium-sized businesses. We're going to have those throughout those days. And then in between, they're going to be invited to like various different things. You'll be able to kick around, create your own groups. And so it'll be really kind of, think about it as 36 hours of intense study and exploration about how to become a better owner, operator, or investor.
So that's Main Street Summit. You can go to mainstreetsummit.com. This is in November. Reserve your spot now, and we hope to see you there.
Sounds great.
This podcast is made available solely for educational purposes, and the information presented here does not constitute investment, legal, tax, or other professional advice, and should not be construed as an offering of advisory services or as a solicitation to buy, an offer to sell, or a recommendation of any securities or other financial instruments. The thoughts and opinions expressed by or through this podcast are those of the individual guests and speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Permanent Equity. The discussion on this podcast of any entity, product, or service does not imply an endorsement thereof, and the guests of this podcast may have a financial interest, whether through investment or otherwise, in any one or more of such entities, products, or services. This podcast is presented by Permanent Equity and may not be copied, reproduced, republished, or posted in any form without its express written consent.